Why, hello there, old sports. Now, Dr. W.D. Gaster is a very interesting character to me, and that might be a funny thing to say to some of you, considering he doesn't really have much of an established character beyond a few personality traits we can theorize about after we make a few assumptions. So, we basically have him down to a T. Adding on to that, even the fact that Gaster is controversial to some extent. Some people think there's lots of people denying Gaster's existence, and while they definitely do exist, I could almost argue that there's more people complaining about Gaster deniers than there are actually Gaster deniers themselves. But then again, Gaster deniers are kind of like flat earthers, in the sense where they're kind of wrong, and not very smart, or at least kind of ignorant to how logic works. Obviously, this is a minority of people, but I've seen multiple people online say that they hope Gaster is a joke, or they hope Gaster is not relevant to Deltarune, or they hope all these things. Or some of them even say, oh, I hope Gaster is an X, Y, and Z because it would be funny. And I feel like at that point you're just trying to be contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. Like, you don't actually care about the story anymore, you just want to make people mad. But then again, this is the internet, so I don't know what I expected. Especially after the whole quote-unquote Mike boss fight in Chapter 4, I have seen some people kind of being like, oh, what if the Gaster deniers are right? Or, oh, I'm worried Toby will make Gaster into a joke character. And today I'd like to discuss why I think Gaster is important, and Mike never was. We just kind of assigned more meaning to him than was intended. I'm going to start out by talking about Mike, considering he's a lot less complicated and has a lot less baggage, even though both of these characters have baggage in some shape, way, or form. Mike was introduced in Chapter 2 through a few lines of dialogue from Spamton, and the thing is, looking back at them now, I can see it as just Spamton trying to copy Tenna in some shape, way, or form, seeing how he tends to do that a lot, or like Spamton tries to mimic other successful people to emulate their success. I could totally see him just calling out for Mike randomly the same way Tenna seems to. During Chapter 3, Tenna is mentioned a few times by Mike, my favorite line being the, "Mike, rebuild my kids" line. And Mike seems to be some sort of producer or like just assistant to Tenna. However, in Chapter 4, we get to fight against Mike, sorta. The thing is, the fight is kind of a hodgepodge of gags related to community in-jokes and theories. And at the end of the fight, it's revealed that no one really knows who Mike is. Some people think that Mike doesn't straight up exist. Some people think Mike is just a figment of Tenna's imagination, or someone he kind of calls to sound more professional. Or they imply sometimes Mike just straight up does things, or some force just straight up does things, or various assistants of Tenna will do it, and then he'll just assume it's Mike. Now, if I were to speculate, Mike was never really supposed to be important. He was kind of just supposed to be a gag about a host of a TV show always calling to their assistant, because Tenna is supposed to be kind of a parody of those things in some shape, way, or form. But since Toby ended up mentioning Mike in some of Spamton's dialogue, Mike kind of became more relevant than he was really intended to, because Spamton kind of became the lore cow for the community to milk dry in the 4 years between releases. And one of the most notable times Spamton mentions Mike is when he kind of breaks his persona for a moment, which kind of draws attention to it and makes it feel more important than it might have been intended to. So I think as some sort of bonus, Toby added in the whole Mike thing as like a gag, because again, Mike was never supposed to be important. We kind of just latched onto him more than was intended, so Toby had some fun with it. And that's the thing. I've heard some people think that the whole thing with Mike is supposed to be making fun of theorists, but think about it. Toby made more songs, more sprites, more animations, more attacks, all this stuff, when he really, if he wanted to mock people, he could have just made a tweet or a Blue Sky post or whatever. But I feel like the fact that he went out of his way to make this, I feel like that's more of a sign of love towards the community than anything else. At most, I think Toby was just playfully teasing us, and I don't feel like it was really meant to be malicious, because I feel like it was supposed to be a joke boss. This wasn't the Shadow Crystal boss, which I think that's why a bunch of other people were upset, because they thought Mike was going to be the Shadow Crystal boss, and he didn't end up being a Shadow Crystal boss. But think about it, the Shadow Crystal boss we did get was very important and taken very seriously in that context. Because even though the old man has a bunch of jokes around him, the actual fight against him as the Hammer of Justice is it takes itself pretty seriously. And may I remind you, Spamton initially starts out as kind of a gag character, and then quickly descends into being a serious threat. In conclusion, I think Mike was never meant to be taken seriously, but since the fandom had 4 years to latch on to anything they could, one of their obsessions became Mike, and then the rest was history. And then, I feel I'll get to this more when I talk about Gaster, but I think since Toby didn't want to let the community down, instead of just, I feel like maybe his original plan was maybe to just have Mike never really be mentioned again, but since Toby saw that the fandom cared about Mike so much, he kind of made Mike relevant in a sense. He gave him a boss fight, even if the boss fight was kind of poking fun at the idea of Mike as a character. The Green Pippin even has a line where it's like, so who is Mike? Who is he? Is he just Tenna's imaginary friend? Is he Tenna's alter ego? Like some alternate personality or something? And why does he get so much love and attention? My point being, Mike was never supposed to be an important character, so he never was. Again, this is Toby's story. I don't think he really cares about our theories as much as some people think he does. He's not trying to trick us. He has a plan for a story that he's been building for about a decade, keep in mind. So I feel like he's going to write the story the way he wants to write the story. And then I feel like the only concessions he'll make are to add in a little secret gag boss here and there to just kind of be like, see, I know what you're saying. Because I feel like that's the reason one of the clicker enemies has the Mike, or the cowboy hat. I think that's the reference to Friend Inside Me, as well as the Cut Board 3 mention of Asgore's favorite TV cowboy canceled cowboy show. Sorry. While what controversy Mike had was mostly related to his relevance and what the gag nature of his fight meant, I feel like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. And people who were upset about it, it's okay to be upset, but I think it was partially just because their theories were wrong and things were different than they expected. And when you have 4 years to build up an expectation in your head and then it's proven false, that can do a number on you, regardless of how justified that is or not. I feel like all feelings are valid, but not necessarily correct, if that makes sense. Or should I say rational. When it comes to people who deny Gaster's existence or deny that he might be relevant in the plot, I don't know how to think about that. It's just like, I feel like you're being intentionally obtuse and intentionally trying to be a contrarian for the reason of being a contrarian. Then, of course, there's the people on the other side who think Gaster is behind literally everything that happens ever. You stub your toe in the middle of the night? That's Dr. W.D. Gaster, baby. But in all seriousness, I think most rational people can agree that Gaster probably is very important, but he's not behind everything, and other characters have their own agency. And again, like I said, most rational people probably believe that, but usually the irrational people are the loudest and most annoying. I also feel like it's more reasonable to deny Gaster's existence when we only had access to Undertale, but ever since Deltarune came out, I feel like it just gets harder and harder to deny that he's important. If you weren't aware, some people used to argue that Gaster was a cut character, or he was meant to be a spoof on cut characters in video games, but I feel like that's not really it wasn't even really a reasonable argument back then, let alone now. First of all, most debug rooms or cut content is always stuck behind the dog check, which is a system in Deltarune and Undertale that basically just locks rooms away from you if you haven't accessed them by normal means. Honestly, I'm pretty sure the only quote-unquote normal dog check room, or the room locked behind the dog check that you can actually access without file editing, is the Mystery Man room. And again, that one I feel like is a bit different because you can access it in normal gameplay, even if it's really rare. But again, other than that, the most important Gaster room, the Entry 17 room, can be accessed by file editing. No having to bypass the dog check through hex editing or anything like that. Like, you don't actually have to alter the program itself to access the most concrete information we have about Gaster. But even if we can all agree on the fact that Gaster exists and is meant to play some role in the story in Undertale, there isn't really much to go on, because it's my belief that Gaster was meant to set up a mystery that will be solved in Deltarune, but as of now I can't really prove that, so I kind of have to just say, but that's just a theory on this one. Personally, I don't think Gaster has much plot relevance in Undertale besides what we directly hear of from the Gaster followers. Part of that, or I just feel like his most obvious connections are to Sans and Alphys. Alphys because he kind of sets up big boots for her to fill, and that kind of plays into her inferiority complex more. And then he's also connected to Sans, because of course he's connected to Sans. Everything is connected to Sans. While I think Undertale is meant to sow the seeds for WD Gaster, Deltarune is where they start to sprout up. The mysterious voice and glowing text that we see at the beginning of Deltarune and during the game over screens is very similar to Gaster. Both have themes that are associated with the term him, or the man, or whatever. Both have the 666 typeface, which is basically how the text is read out, at what speed, etc. And as you may or may not know, Gaster is associated with being known as the man, or him, and is also heavily associated with the number 666. So I feel like right out the gate, Toby was basically trying to tell us that Gaster is at least relevant to Deltarune. What level of relevancy he may or may not have is obviously up to debate, but it's a debate nonetheless. It's not just something you can write off as, oh, Gaster isn't important. However, like I said earlier, some people are a bit too eager to contribute everything to Gaster, when that may not be the case, or it may be, we don't know yet. I feel like the only thing I can say for certain is that Gaster is relevant in some shape, way, or form. It's just to what extent he is relevant is the real kicker. Personally, I think it's impressive how Toby was able to build almost like a boogeyman-esque figure in Undertale through Gaster and his secrets, even if they didn't remain secrets for very long and became one of the easiest things to learn about if you dug into the fandom at all. But now we live in an interesting time. Well, we live in an interesting time for lots of reasons. In terms of Deltarune, we're living in an interesting time because eventually we're probably going to get a lot more concrete information about Gaster. And inevitably some people will be disappointed, some people will be vindicated, some people will be fine. They won't care either way. Because regardless of who Gaster ends up being, some people are going to be proven right, some people are going to be proven wrong, and like I said, some people won't care either way. Despite not knowing much about Gaster, in terms of how he is supposed to be characterized, I do feel comfortable saying that if he's more like any character than any other, that character would be Flowey. And that's because I think he's supposed to be a reflection. Flowey is a reflection of a player who picks up Undertale. He starts out doing what would come natural to him and mostly being nice to everyone, maybe doing some other things here and there, but it's not like he was out for blood necessarily. But then as he realizes it's more of a game to him, he just starts to lose care. He doesn't really see these things as people anymore, so why do their lives matter? And then that kind of culminates in, or at least on a thematic level, it culminates in, well, what if you just erased everything? Gaster, however, I feel like is supposed to be a reflection of how a game developer sees a game that they made. If Gaster is the mysterious voice and glowing text, he operates on a level disconnected from everything else in the game, and that opens up various cans of worms. I also think it's interesting that when Toby Fox released Undertale, his mouthpiece was Flowey, but with Deltarune, the mouthpiece is the voice, or who I think is Gaster. And I feel like Toby speaks through Gaster a lot more than he did as Flowey, in the sense of Gaster seems to really care about this world and the people in it, and just the existence of it in general. He isn't like Flowey, where he thinks it's just a game and a story that he can bend to his will. Gaster sees it as beautiful for those reasons. Or at least that's my interpretation based off of that one line of dialogue where he's like, we've reached the halfway point, my Deltarune, yada yada yada. I don't know, I just got off, the vibe I got off that was very, like, caring, I guess, but then again, vibes aren't science, so what do I know? I'd also like to bring up that if Gaster just happened to not be important whatsoever, that'd kind of be a slap in the face to lots of people. While I bet it would be confusing if Gaster showed up out of nowhere at the end of the game and then just kind of hijacked the narrative, I feel like the alternative is slightly worse, because let's be honest, a good portion of Deltarune fans have been Undertale fans for a long time and have been waiting for answers to these mysteries for literal years. And considering the fact that Gerson was quite literally and figuratively revitalized by Chapter 4 and the Dark Fountains, I feel like Toby could find a way to make Gaster not feel rushed in the next 3 chapters, but that's just me, I don't know. And if you don't remember, Flowey, who is the main antagonist of Undertale, is absent for most of it. He really only shows up for a teensy bit at the beginning, and then most of his screen time is at the end of each different route. So, who's to say Gaster couldn't work the same, even if he doesn't take on a villain role. I feel like Toby could write that in a way that feels satisfying, because I'll be honest, Flowey is one of my favorite characters in anything, ever. And even if the build-up for Mike was kind of overblown, there was still build-up nonetheless, even if I don't think it was very rational to get that excited about a character with so few mentions. But I feel like if Gaster was written off as a gag character, that would cause a whole nother level of something. And I do think it's odd how I've seen some people legitimately just say they want Gaster to be a joke character because it would upset people. But then again, I don't know, people are idiots, so I'm expecting too much out of internet people. Regardless, only time can tell who and what Gaster will become, and I'm excited to see what happens. Now, I do apologize if this video was too incoherent, because I try to go for medium amounts of incoherentness, because then it kind of feels like your weird friend telling you about their weird fixation, and I feel like I kind of like that vibe with videos, so I try to make my videos like that. But hopefully I was able to organize my thoughts somewhat coherently. Anyways, thank you for watching. Share your thoughts down below about Gaster. Maybe like and subscribe. I'm trying to reach 3,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I don't know if it's possible. It probably is. I don't know. I'm gonna keep making videos. Anyways, have a good day. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.